Lion in the Wind, Chapter 24. 2.5 years later. Nagago stood on the top of a mountain in the northern range and stared out across the Yigzin nation in disdain. He'd been so close to finally wiping out his enemy's chosen people. But his efforts had been soundly defeated by Mashwa's proxies. Even his most powerful servants could not stop them. He angrily thought about what lay before him and the options at his disposal. Just then, a bird-like creature made entirely of fire and bone landed on his shoulder and whispered in his ear. A demonic smile crossed his face. "He is he?" he said with delight. A dark, guttural chuckle escaped his black lips. Then there may still be some use for him. He may not wish to serve me, but his greed can be turned to my advantage. Go! Send for my darkest servants. I have work for them to do." The bird belched a small tongue of bluish flame and then swooped off into the prairie to do its master's bidding. As it vanished into the distance, Nagago laughed with evil delight. "This battle isn't over yet, Mashwa. I will still destroy your people, one way or another." Delgra sat quietly in a patch of short reed grass on the side of a long, sloping hill and ate his lunch in silence. Soft puffy clouds drifted overhead as the twin suns blazed high above in the noonday sky. As he chewed on his sandwich, a dark shadow appeared over his head followed by a strange thumping sound. Looking up, he noticed Odivian pounding a large beach umbrella into the ground next to him. "What's this for?" he asked. "Too much of the suns isn't good for you," said Odivian with a smile. Delgra grunted. "Doesn't bother me. I've spent so many years in the field that I don't even sunburn anymore." "Maybe so, but you've been at a desk job for over 5 years. That alone ought to lower your resistance a bit." Delgra chuckled. "Not likely. It's hard to stain old leather," he replied. Odivian grabbed his laptop and took a place under the umbrella. He then reached into a small, brown paper bag, pulled out some fruit and began munching on it. Delgra nodded towards the laptop and asked, "So what are you working on today?" "I came down here because I have some things I want to show you." This piqued Delgra's interest just as Odivian had expected it to. "Do tell," replied Delgra. "Well, I've been doing some of my usual research on the web, and across the military networks of late, and I think I've come across something rather disturbing." "Like what?" asked Delgra. "Well, I think I've found evidence that Pharaoh Black is preparing to commit treason." Delgra seemed surprised at this. "The same guy who funded the Lion Project?" "One and the same." Delgra's eyes narrowed. "I've always been somewhat suspicious of him." "What specifically do you think he's doing?" "I'm not sure as of yet. But he's definitely up to something." Delgra grunted. "Given the way he prepared us for our war against the Gorg, it could just be another one of his efforts to keep us safe. I mean, he did protect us from being completely annihilated. He likely did that in order to save us for his own evil purposes. You can't exactly enslave a country if it doesn't exist anymore." Delgra contemplated this some more, nibbling at his lip as he did. Good point. But are you sure he's truly dirty, and not just being self-interested like every other businessman?" he asked after a moment. "Trust me. He's as dirty as they come. I'm just not quite sure what kind of dirty." "Are you positive about this?" "I wouldn't have brought it up if I wasn't. While I don't have anything concrete to pin him with yet, he's made enough questionable moves of late to raise a lot of flags with me. So I'd say I'm reasonably positive on this." Delgra pursed his lips and thought about this some more. "Well, I'm not. However, I'm still interested in testing the waters to see if your theory is valid. Because, if it is, then we'll need to deal with him quickly. Can we still reach our contacts inside Sentinel and the Special Operations Corps and ask for their help in solving this mystery?" Odivian nodded. "Way ahead of you. They're already standing by and ready whenever we need them. I've also contacted Oik and Fergant. They said they will help us find any answers they can." Delgra chuckled. "Well done, Sergeant, I'm impressed." Odivian smiled. "Hey, I aim to please." Brakeman carefully made his way through the narrow confined space of an air duct as two small scout spiders moved quietly in front of him. He would have preferred to have stayed back in the safety of his dad's laboratory, but he had to find out what Black was up to. Too many strange things had been happening lately that defied reasoning. He tried contacting Meshwa in search of answers, but so far had received no reply. In fact, Meshwa had been strangely silent the last few years. As such, Brakeman had taken matters into his own hands. And today he'd either put his concerns to rest, or he'd confirm them, which meant he'd need to quickly act to protect his family if he did. He and his spiders continued on in silence for several more feet until one of the spiders found a junction. Brakeman stopped near the corner and carefully leaned a small mirror around it. The path was clear. They then continued down the ventilation shaft for 100 more feet until they reached the corner they wanted. One of the scout spiders then stopped there and set itself up as a laser relay. The other continued forward and around the corner as Brakeman paused in the conduit shore of the junction in order to keep himself hidden. The second spider soon reached the end of the junction and began peering through one of the ventilation grills that overlooked Black's office. It raised its own laser transmitter and began sending everything it heard and saw back to the first spider who, in turn, relayed it to Brakeman. What he saw intrigued him. What are those two up to, he thought to himself. Where are the lions? Asked Black. In the field. They've decided to check up on the Gorg to make sure they're honoring the treaty, said Elgar. Black nodded as he fiddled with one of his cybernetic legs. Good. That'll make sure the Gorg don't become a problem again. Once was enough. Just make sure they check in with us again when they're done. Yes, sir, I will. Shall I have them return here, or simply report in? Just have them report in. We don't need their services just yet. Understood. But what about their creator, Dr. Bergen? Do you think he'll go along with our plans? Asked Elgar. Black shook his head. He won't join us. He's a full-blooded scientist without a single corrupt bone in his body. We wouldn't be able to sway him to our cause no matter what we try. But won't that affect our relationship with the lions? Black disconnected the lower half of his right leg at the knee and lifted it up so he could get a better look at the ankle joint. Given what I have planned for him, that's unlikely. Speaking of which, how's our newest project coming along? He asked. Better than expected. It should be ready before the end of the year. Black grinned with pleasure. That soon, eh? Possibly. But we're not entirely sure yet. Then it may be wise for us to either secure the loyalty of the lions within that time, or else get rid of them. How do you plan to do that? By using a little political leverage, a bargaining chip, if you will. Elgar studied him for a moment and then cocked an eyebrow. You're going to use their parents against them, aren't you? Black grinned slyly. I'm going to do more than that. I plan to use Dr. Bergen and his pet tiger as hostages to secure their loyalty. With them in our grasp, the lions will not dare turn against us. Elgar perked up slightly. You're going to hold them captive? Black snorted. Not a chance. We'd get slaughtered if I even hinted at doing something like that. No, I have a much better plan for those two. I intend to put them on ice, literally. How? Black fiddled with his ankle joint briefly and then locked the entire appendage back in place before removing it again, being dissatisfied with the results. That I'm not certain of just yet. As such, I need you to discuss it with our lead physician. Find something in their medical histories that will give us a reason to put them in cryogenic storage. If you can't find something factual, then make something up. But be sure it's believable. Chigani and his siblings possess a fairly extensive knowledge of medicine, so the ruse needs to be foolproof. Elgar nodded. I'll see what I can find. But once that's done, then what? Black gave a low, demonic laugh. Once we have their parents on ice, I will be able to easily secure the allegiance of the lions. Elgar frowned. Even with their parents on ice, there's no guarantee they'll join us. Black grinned with devilish glee. Actually, I believe they will. Elgar frowned slightly. If you say so, he replied. He then turned and walked out of the room as Black continued to tinker with his cybernetic leg. Brakeman frowned. Oh, this is not good, he thought to himself. The two spiders then quickly retreated and took up places next to him. He looked at the first one, and said, "Track Elgar. Find out where he's going. Make sure that nothing happens to Mom or Dad. If he's about to attack them, signal me and I'll send help." The little spider acknowledged its orders, and then hurried away. Brakeman then grumbled quietly to himself. He didn't like what he heard. Great. Now I have to figure out how to get both of them out of here, he said to himself. But just then, an idea struck him. He grinned slyly. Ah, yeah, that'll work. The question though is, will they be gullible enough to fall for it? Elgar walked into Black's office the next morning and tossed a letter down on his desk. Black looked at it curiously. What's this? He asked. It's a summons. It came via the priority channels this morning. Apparently, the General Secretary wants Dr. Bergen and Ms. Persia to report to the capital immediately so he can talk to them in person, said Elgar gruffly. Black furrowed his brow in thought. Whatever for? He asked. Elgar shrugged. I don't know. The summons didn't say. Apparently the purpose of the talk is classified, and we don't have permission to know the reasons. Black crossed his arms and sat back in his chair as he thought. It must have been a spur-of-the-moment thing, or something he did on his own, because I don't remember hearing anything about it in my daily briefings. Should I give it to him? Asked Elgar. Black thought for a moment, and then shrugged. I don't see where it would hurt us any. It's not like it'll delay or ruin our plans. Just be sure that your men are ready to ice them when they get back. Elgar nodded. They already are. Good, said Black with devilish glee. Bergen stared curiously at the summons. By the gates of Tursar. They can't be serious, he said. Persia leapt onto a lab table behind him and carefully read the summons over his shoulder. She then gasped in surprise. I'm to come as well. What do they want me for? She asked. Bergen shrugged. I really don't know. But we need to pack quickly. It'll take us most of today to drive to the capital in order to make it in time for tomorrow morning's meeting. Well then, I'll go get packed. Oh wait, I already am, she quipped. But you don't have anything to pack. Exactly, grinned Persia. Bergen gave her a bemused look. Smarty pants, he chided. Guilty as charged, replied Persia whimsically. Bergen then quickly packed a few things in a small day bag, tossed it in the car, and the three of them were soon on the road. Brakeman, who sat nervously on the back seat of the car, watched as they rolled up to the main gate, paused briefly and then rolled out into the prairie. So far his plan had gone well, but he knew that, at any moment, things could go horribly wrong. Several of his recon spiders, who hung precariously off the bottom of the car, watched the road behind them for signs of pursuit. But much to Brakeman's relief, none came. Even so, the next several hours went by slowly as Brakeman waited anxiously for any sign that his plan had been discovered. But when nothing appeared, he eventually relaxed. The first threat was over. Now all he needed to concern himself with was executing the next step of his plan. But that would have to wait until they were well away from the main highway. Several hours later Bergen turned off the main freeway, and onto a simple, two-lane provincial highway that acted as a shortcut to a larger freeway not far to the south. This was exactly what Brakeman was waiting for. Namely, somewhere that he could execute the next step of his plan without drawing unwanted attention to himself. After again making sure that nobody was following them, he carefully pulled a small capsule out of his pocket and activated it. It hissed quietly for a few seconds as it filled the car with an odorless, colorless gas that quickly put Bergen and Persia to sleep. Seeing that the car was now unmanned, several of Brakeman's spiders quickly piled through the window and took control of the vehicle, pulling it safely to the side of the road. They then helped put Bergen in the back seat and strapped him in. Once he was secured, Brakeman climbed into the driver's seat and, with the help of his spiders, turned the vehicle around and headed with all due speed towards the northern mountains. They arrived there several hours later in a sleepy little village that sat nestled neatly between two long, sloping hills. He stopped in front of a small cottage at the far edge of the village and got out. He was immediately greeted by a kindly old man and his two servants, who took Bergen and Persia upstairs and placed them on soft beds in the loft where they could sleep off the knockout gas that Brakeman had used on them. After he was sure that his family was well taken care of, Brakeman met with the old man downstairs as his robots took Bergen's car and hid it in a nearby barn. "I really appreciate what you've done for us," said Brakeman. The old man smiled. "If what you've told us is true, then our efforts to protect your family will be well worth the risk to ourselves and the syndicate," he said in a deep and weathered voice. "Once all of this is sorted out, I'll make sure you guys are well compensated for your efforts," said Brakeman. The old man shook his head and gestured dismissively. "What you are doing is more than sufficient payment for their protection." Brakeman pulled a thick envelope out of his backpack and handed it to the old man, who opened it and stared at the contents in surprise. He then closed it and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Although, a little extra payment never hurts from time to time," he said with a sly grin. "I'll be back before the end of next month. If you don't hear from me by then, take them to the Sadisons. Find a man there who goes by the name of Oik. He'll take it from there." The old man bowed slightly. "It will be as you wish." Delgra watched the news as reporters flooded Black's Northern Robotics Research Facility to cover the story of the year. Bergen had vanished, and nobody knew where he'd gone. Police and federal investigators had spent days questioning Black about Bergen's whereabouts after receiving an anonymous tip that he was trying to kill the famous scientist. Later in the newscast, Black was interviewed by the Evening News about his involvement in Bergen's disappearance. His elegance on camera appeared to sway everyone into believing that he spoke the truth. It even convinced the police enough that they no longer considered him a suspect. However, it didn't fool Delgra. To him, Black's face and expressions spoke volumes, and he didn't like what he was seeing. "It looks like you might be right about Black," he said. "Do you think he's responsible for Bergen's disappearance?" Delgra rubbed his chin in thought. "No, I don't, actually. I can tell by his face that even he doesn't know where they went. But, at the same time, I think he may be the reason that they went missing." Odivian squinted in confusion. "You lost me. How would Black?" He then paused as an idea hit him. "Oh, wait. You're suggesting that someone else kidnapped Bergen and Persia in order to protect them from Black," he exclaimed. Delgra nodded. "I can't be certain, but I'm willing to bet that's what happened." "All right, so that begs a new question. Who would have done this, and why?" Delgra sighed as he bit his lip and thought. "I don't know, but I plan to find out." Chigani sniffed the pavement near the side of the highway and studied the grass around him as vehicles raced by not far away. "Anything?" asked Penn. Chigani's eyes narrowed. "Nothing. If they came this way like the witnesses said, it's likely that their scent has already been lost." Penn sighed. "We've been out here a week already and we've found nothing. The longer this takes us, the colder the trail gets." Chigani sat down. "I know. But we have to explore every possible angle and avenue. Something is bound to eventually lead us to them." "I agree, but what?" "This trail is obviously a dead end," said Penn. As Chigani listened to reports coming into him from other lions nearby, Penn looked out across the prairie on both sides of the highway, and then off towards the mountains in the distance. As he did, an idea struck him. "We could go north to the mountains." "North?" asked Chigani curiously. Penn shrugged. "Well, nothing says he stayed on this highway. Besides, if they were kidnapped, it's possible they would have been taken up north." "Why?" asked Chigani. "Well, why not? There's only farms, and a handful of small towns up that way. What better place is there to hide someone as important as our parents? And, besides, it's in the opposite direction they were traveling. So it seems entirely reasonable to me." Chigani thought about this and nodded. That's possible. So let's explore that idea. Gather everyone together and we'll move north in search of them. As Penn began issuing orders to the others, Chigani looked off towards the mountains and thought about his parents. Mashwa, allow us to find the path that leads to our parents. And, wherever they are, please take care of them and keep them safe until we arrive. Black slammed his fist into his desk, sending splinters flying across the room. I can't believe this is happening. Everything was going so perfectly, and now we're totally shut down until this whole affair with Bergen blows over. He then grit his teeth angrily, and said, I want to know who kidnapped him. It could be the Mitizen. They'd benefit the most from this, said Elgar flatly. Black punched a hole in a nearby wall in frustration and then looked down at the rough, gray metal that peeked through his now torn, artificial skin. Contact our agents operating in the Mitizen Nation. Tell them to find out if any of them are behind this kidnapping. If they are, I want some heads, he said through gritted teeth. Elgar bowed slightly. And what of our efforts to bring the lions to our side, he asked. Black inhaled deeply, and then gave a long, frustrated sigh. Hopefully this won't spoil things, or we may be forced to go forward without them. Understood. Brakeman trudged through the soft, damp earth of the northern prairie as a cold wind tossed the budding stalks of reed grass into brilliant, green waves. I'm starting to wonder if coming this way was such a good idea, he thought. Hey, Mashwa. If it's possible, could you point Chigani my direction? It'd really be a huge help, he continued. Silence. I don't know why you're not talking to me anymore, but either way, keep Mom and Dad safe and help me find at least one of the lions. He had no more than finished his thought when a large, golden face appeared out of the grass in front of him. Brakeman blinked in surprise. It was Neil Mara. She stared curiously at him in return. Well, that was quick, he thought. What are you doing out here? She asked. I'd ask you the same thing, but that's irrelevant right now. I need to speak with Chigani. It's about Mom and Dad. Her eyes grew wide. Do you know where they are? She asked. Just let me talk to Chigani, okay, said Brakeman sternly. I will relay to him whatever message you have, she replied. Brakeman crossed his arms. In person. It's kind of important. Realizing that Brakeman's news was apparently for Chigani's ears only, she called to him over the radio and relayed the request. A few seconds later, she said, he's coming right now. It'll be about 20 minutes before he can reach us. Please stay here and wait for him. Brakeman lifted a mud-caked foot and said, it's not like I'm going anywhere. Nearly 20 minutes later, Chigani, Penn, and several other lions arrived. I am here, said Chigani as he trotted to a stop. Brakeman raised an eyebrow in muted consternation. I was hoping this conversation would be a bit more, private, he said sarcastically. Given the situation, I did not feel it was best to come alone, said Chigani. Brakeman shrugged. All right, fair enough. Do you have word on where Mother and Father are? I do. But I've got a lot to explain first. So listen carefully, said Brakeman. The lions perked up in surprise as this was the first good news they'd had in a while. Where are they? And who took them? Whoever it is, I'll rip their head off, roared Penn. Whoa, pussycat. First, let me explain. Then you can decide if you want to rip my head off or not. Okay, said Brakeman. The lions all looked at him with puzzled glances. What are you talking about? Asked Penn. All right, first off, I was the one who kidnapped Mom and Dad. But it was for their protection, said Brakeman. The lions gasped in surprise. Why? Who wishes to harm them? Asked Chigani. Believe it or not, Feral Black, said Brakeman flatly. The lions looked at each other in shock. Are you certain of this? He does not seem like one who would do harm to them for any reason, said Chigani. Actually, he wants to use them as tools to force your loyalty to him. Apparently he's got some kind of twisted plan in the works, and you're a big part of that. Do you have proof of this? I figured you'd ask, so I compiled a complete briefing on what he's doing, including some video of him and Elgar talking about their plans. I didn't get everything, but I got enough. He then transmitted everything he knew to the lions. The lions quickly reviewed everything he'd given to them before discussing this between themselves, as they soon came to understand the full depth of the situation. It does appear that he may be up to something dishonest. But we will need more information before we can move against him, said Chigani. Brakeman grunted. Seriously? Do you realize how much information you already have? I do. But I wish to be certain, beyond all possible doubt, of his intentions. Brakeman frowned at this. Seriously? How much more information do you need? He groaned. Do we have any ideas on what we should do about this? We can't just go charging in there and arrest him based on conjecture. What we have now is just circumstantial, said Neomara. Circumstantial. Guys? He pretty much confessed to what he was gonna do. Like you really need something more, said Brakeman. What you've given us is certainly more than merely circumstantial. But Neomara is right, we need to gather more information to be certain of either his innocence, or his guilt, said Chigani. Brakeman frowned. Is anybody listening to me? The guy is guilty as sin. I agree. More information is needed, said Neomara. Brakeman snorted and then facepalmed at this. Apparently not, he muttered. And we need to get Mom and Dad to safety, said Penn. Yeah, speaking of which, where are they? Asked Neomara. The lions then turned their attention to Brakeman, who waved his hands dismissively. I'd rather not tell you that right now. However, I will say that they're safe. How do you know? Asked Penn. Again, I'm not saying. It's for their safety. Trust me on this. Then, in that case, we should work on investigating Black, said Penn. Agreed. But before we do that, we require allies. I fear that much of what needs to be done is beyond our abilities, said Chigani. Any ideas on who to call? Asked Penn. I know a few we could ask, said Brakeman. Really? Who? Brakeman laughed. Ha! Somebody was listening. So who is it? Brakeman grinned sheepishly. Would you believe that they work for the syndicate? He half expected to get scolded by all the lions for his odd underworld alliance. But, to his surprise, the lions actually seemed all right with this. If they're being taken care of, then let's get going, said Penn. Chigani shook his head. Not yet. I want to be sure that Mother and Father are safe before we go, replied Chigani. They are, said Brakeman. I need to verify that, in person, replied Chigani sternly. Brakeman grunted. I was hoping you wouldn't say that. The less people who know where they are, the better. I agree. But I would feel better knowing for certain. Brakeman studied Chigani for several moments, and then put his fists on his hips as he grunted in frustration. You know, sometimes you can be more stubborn than stone. For once I wish you would just trust me. I know what I'm doing, he said. Chigani narrowed his eyes. I trust you. However, it is best if we watched over them. I am worried that those that you've tasked with their protection will be insufficient to protect them given who is against us. A small scout spider climbed out of Brakeman's backpack and onto his shoulder. I'm not, he said as he gently stroked the small machine. Those don't count, said Penn. Brakeman shrugged. Who said I was using any of my helpers to watch over them? I've got syndicate thugs for that. Nobody will get to them so long as those guys are on duty. Brakeman, said Chigani sternly. The little droid glared at him briefly and then grunted in frustration. All right, fine. But don't blame me if they get discovered.